Morning, friends. So was my birthday yesterday. That was important. No, I haven't told you why it was important yet. It was important because I spent the whole of the last 12 months thinking I was 46. And when I spoke to my mum yesterday, I realised I only turned 46 yesterday. So the next 12 months are like a bonus year for me. I'll probably just waste them like I wasted all the others. But anyway, that's up to me. So I think that each church has its own particular culture. And one of the things that I love about our culture here at LifePoint is that we have this way of being able to be quite honest about life as it is. So this isn't a church where you have to pretend to be something that you're not. And that's a good thing, because pretending to be something that you're not is extraordinarily bad for you. And of course, the most common pretense that we would feel pressured to have in a church is one that would say something to the effect of, now that I'm a Christian, now that I am trying to figure out how to be a person of faith and live that faith, I sin less and follow Jesus more. The worst of my moral missteps are behind me. The darkest chapters in my life are now firmly shut closed. The twisted corners of my soul, such as they were, have now, thank God, forever been straightened out. And we would say, I'm sorry, but it's just not that simple. People like you and I, who are doing our level best to live our faith, sometimes do things, feel things, and say things that we deeply regret. So from a theological point of view, we would agree with the big teachings of the Reformation. We would say that we are at the same time, in the same person, saints and sinners. We would say that we are people who are right with God, no question. But we still nonetheless do wrong things. So this morning, I wanted to talk with you a little bit about some of the contradictory aspects of your Christian life. So Jesus said famously, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will receive comfort." And at a first glance, that saying of Jesus seems rather okay. This is the sort of sentiment that you might expect to read on one of those with sympathy cards that you buy from Walmart, or one of those cliched phrases you sometimes hear spoken at a funeral. It's a platitude, it's something you say in church and it's all right. But when these words first left the lips of Jesus, they weren't all right. And they weren't bland, and they weren't comforting. Jesus intended this to be a radically different way of looking at life and faith. So the context of this sentence is that Jesus is setting his audience up for a major talk on some of the rules and some of the conditions and some of the expectations of the normal Christian life. And he sets that talk up with this sentence. And I'd like you to notice, first of all, that the sentence begins with the word blessed. The word blessed is a translation of a Greek word makarios, which literally means to be happy. So Jesus then is talking about happiness, but in a counterintuitive sort of way. And this is interesting to us, because of course we all want to be happy. And the reason I say that Jesus speaks about happiness in a counterintuitive way is because in the first century, just like in the 21st, people already had a fair idea of what a happy life looked like. Happiness was and is the emotional response to life when life goes well. The unquestioned logic, then as now, is that happiness is how we feel in response to entertainment. Happiness is how we feel in response to good news. Happiness is how we feel in response to security, to money, to good relationships, to a general feeling of well-being. And we intuitively understand, therefore, that the emotion of happiness, if it is present in our lives, automatically rules out the presence of disappointment and difficulty and awkwardness and struggle. One, so we think, can either have one emotion or the other. We cannot have both. We cannot have happiness and difficulty. We cannot have happiness and awkwardness. We cannot have happiness and struggle. It's one or the other. We understand this. Jesus, it seems, did not. Jesus looks at life in an upside-down way in this sentence, and what he essentially says is, happy are the sad. Ow. This is different. In the New Testament, there are, as far as I know, 9 words that the New Testament writers use to describe the emotional response to life when life becomes disappointing. And those words in the New Testament are on a scale of severity. So at one end of the scale, there would be the emotional response to how you feel when you get up for breakfast and you burn your toast and the kids used all the jam and there's nothing you can have. You know, barely flickers on the emotional scale of disappointment. And then you go to work and your boss calls you into her office and she tells you that because of a downturn in the economy, she's got to scale back your salary. Well, when you hear that news, you move slightly further up the emotional scale of severity, of disappointment, of some of the words that the New Testament uses. Well, at the very end of those disappointing words, at the highest end of the scale, is this word that Jesus uses, mourn. So severe is the emotion that this word describes that not all of us in this room will have yet felt its full force. This word has to do with the pain you feel when you lose someone. And such is the intensity of that pain that it disables you temporarily. The sort of pain to which there are no simple remedies, perhaps no remedies at all. The sort of pain that only happens when you lose someone to whom you were deeply attached. So this is how you felt then, when that person you loved stopped loving you. You couldn't eat, you couldn't sleep, you couldn't think, you couldn't walk, you couldn't talk, you couldn't get off the sofa. Because your world was ripped from under you. This is how you felt when your loved one died, and what for many years was your home suddenly started to feel like a house. This is how you felt when you lost your closest friend and you couldn't pick up the phone anymore, hear their voice, and the sound of a car pulling into the driveway would never be theirs. And losses of those magnitudes are hard to verbalize. We feel them with such force that we become numb, disabled, and detached from normal life. For example, the Bible uses this particular word to describe how a parent feels when they lose a child. You understand then, serious, disorienting emotion. So, the temptation then, quite naturally, is to read the word mourn that Jesus uses in this sentence and apply this logic to a funeral context, and immediately the logic becomes perverse and unwelcome and unchristian. Whereby we would say to a friend at the worst point in their life, blessed are you who mourn, for you shall be happy. No. Get lost. Shove it. This is not a welcome sentiment. This is not what Jesus means. In this sentence, Jesus is talking to a group of people who, just like you and just like me, were rather serious about what it meant to be a person of faith in the particular world in which they found themselves. And they were making an effort to live that faith. And in the early days of their particular faith journey, he uses this word mourn to describe how those people felt when they realized that their plan of living a Christian life was frequently thwarted by the guilt of being a Christian who isn't very good at being a Christian. So Jesus uses this word then to describe that gut-wrenching feeling you have when you look at yourself in the mirror and you don't like what you see. That feeling that you have when you are reminded through your own actions that you are, in the words of the Reformation, a saint who sins. That you are someone who is right with God, no question. But you nonetheless are prone to wrong things. So this is a religious emotion. And could we use that emotion to describe ourselves? Would you be happy with this label? I'm happy with this label. A Christian who's just not very good at being Christian. You all right with that? Does that describe you? Okay. Would it be better if I asked you the question last night? Do you know what I mean? We're complicated and contradictory. This is normal, but this is the context into which Jesus applies this word mourning. Have a look at this. So this comes from a great bit of the Bible called the book of Nehemiah in the Old Testament. And in this particular episode, we're told that all the people gathered together at the Watergate in the town square. So I guess they're having a big public meeting of some description. Everyone's there. It's good. And then they told Ezra the scribe, so this guy in this story is like 4th century BC clergy, and they asked this particular person to bring out the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had commanded for Israel. Now, the context here is that all of the wisdom of the Bible, the Ten Commandments and all that stuff, that had for several generations been lost to collective consciousness. Did I say that word right? I think I did. So no one really knew what the Ten Commandments were at this particular point. No one really understood the story of the Bible. No one really had a clue about any of that stuff. So they didn't really know what God expected. And this is the point of the story where the divine wisdom, with all of its expectations and rules and conditions, is reintroduced to the collective consciousness. We're told that they, that is the clergy, read from the book of the law of God. Everyone's there. This is a new experience. They've never heard it before. And they made it clear. And they gave the meaning so that people could understand what was being read. So, notice, if you will, that their job that day wasn't just to teach the Bible. Their job was to teach people the Bible. To teach it in such a way that as wide an audience as possible could make sense of it. And, by the way, one of the values of our church here is that we are not into teaching the Bible. We're not. We're into teaching the Bible in such a way that as many people as possible can understand it. Especially people who've been turned off by what they've heard and it didn't make sense to them. I mean, if a person comes to church and is taught the Bible, but they don't understand what they've been taught, it's kind of a waste of time, isn't it? Like if you're talking, but they don't understand what you're saying, or they're not listening, are you really talking? Right? If a husband expresses an opinion on his own in the forest. Is he still wrong? That's another question you can ask. But you know what I mean, though? The point isn't just to teach what's right. The point is to explain things in such a way that people actually understand, because it's important. Anyway, so for the first time in a generation in this story, people are standing in this town square and they're getting an understanding of what God said and what it might mean for the life they're trying to live. And their response to that understanding is fascinating. As soon as the clergy finished reading the story, the clergy then had to immediately say to the people, whoa, 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 whoa. Do not mourn. Do not weep. For, the writer says, they had all begun weeping as they listened to the words of the Bible. And then the priests had to calm the people down, saying, do not grieve. So what's happening here then is that as they heard, for example, the Ten Commandments, when they heard all the moral imperatives that were supposed to be guiding and shaping their lives, they literally felt sick to their stomach. They felt severe emotional pain because they knew themselves well enough to know that they were contradictory characters. They had a desire to do and be right in this life, but occasionally had desires of another type, and they didn't go together. So we would say then that an important part of being Christian is taking a good long honest look at yourself and realizing that you're probably not all that good at being Christian. And in fact, that's not just true in Christianity, that just makes sense in life in general, does it not? Unless you're honest with where you're at today, you're unlikely to ever make the necessary changes that will take you where you'd like to get tomorrow. Right? If you have a business, for example, and you think your business is going great even though it isn't, you're unlikely to give yourself the kick up the backside that you need to make the changes that you have to make to get yourself where you'd like to get tomorrow. If you're getting, hardly need to use another example, but I may, if you take a passing look at yourself in the mirror before you leave the house and you say to yourself you look fine, when evidently you don't. You're unlikely, I didn't need to use the word evidently, but it kind of worked. You're unlikely to make the necessary changes to the way you look to make yourself actually look fine. Do you know what I mean? Honesty matters, especially when you're talking to yourself. St. Augustine, one of the early church fathers, said that what you are must always displease you if you are to become what you are not. Let me say that again. What you are must always displease you if you are to become what you are not. And yet we put too much energy, I think, into pretending what we're not. And we leave ourselves too little energy to do the real work of actually becoming what we'd like to be. It's particularly true in our Instagram culture and our Facebook culture. We put so much effort into, for example, pretending that we have an interesting life. It would make more sense to actually have an interesting life and put the effort into that rather than into the pretense. Anyway, the writers of the New Testament, many of whom were there when Jesus spoke this jarring sentence about mourning, didn't envisage that the Christian church would be a place where people pretended to be perfect. On the contrary, they envisaged that it would be full of people who were fully aware of what their imperfections were. They envisaged that the church would be full of people who said of themselves with a sheepish and a disbelieving grin, I am right with God. I am. I'm a Christian. I'm right with God. That's my core central belief. That says everything about me. But my rightness with God isn't based upon my own morality, because the truth is, I'm not all that moral. My rightness with God isn't based on my flawless character, because, the truth is I have flaws. My rightness with God isn't based on my religious life, because the truth is I'm kind of not all that great at the religious life. My being right with God is based upon Jesus and his death for me on the cross. Upon the big idea that on the cross God transferred Jesus' rightness onto me and my wrongness onto him. But nonetheless, what God did for me on the cross doesn't stop me now and again from being horrified at my own contradictions, at my own struggle, at my own failure. There are aspects of me that I hate. And I grieve over them. What's wrong with that? Is that not okay? Have a look at this. In the New Testament it says to the church, "Come near to God and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts." These words were written to a group of Christians. And the man who wrote these words was under no illusions about what Christians are like. That there are aspects of their life that are frankly unchristian. And rather than pretend that that's not the case, which is profoundly unhelpful, he just gets it out into the open and says, hey guys, let's talk about the stuff that isn't working. And rather than pretending it's not there, or rather than shrugging our shoulders and saying no big deal, we're all human, he says instead, guys, grieve over what's wrong, will you? Like, take a good, long, honest look at your life, pinpoint what's not working, and love yourself enough to feel bad about it. Do you know what I mean? Like, if it's not working, it's a big deal. Feel bad about what's not working and make some adjustments. That's not just Christianity, that's common sense. In your life, in my life, there is, I suppose, things to cry over. Things to look in the mirror and feel pain about and regret about. And in that pain and regret, Jesus wants us to know and to feel happiness. He wants us to understand that it's a good thing every now and again to look at what's screwed up and to say it's screwed up. And to feel bad about it. And to try and straighten it out. It is only when we grieve over what's wrong that we receive the comfort of a God who is kind to the wrong. When Jesus spoke these things to his followers, he was saying, "Blessed are those who mourn because of their sin. Blessed are those who mourn over all the things that are wrong in their life. Blessed are those who walk around with the regret of what was damaged and what didn't work. Who are frustrated because of their lack of progress. They shall be comforted." Look at this next sentence. God speaking in this sentence says, "This is the one I esteem." Not the one who lives a great Christian life. Not the one who's moral all the time, who's chaste all the time, who never puts a foot wrong. Not that one, as you would expect. This is the one I esteem. Rather, the one who knows himself well enough to know that he isn't a great Christian and who sometimes makes mistakes. The one who is humble and contrite in spirit and who trembles at my word. It seems in the Bible that the mark of a person who follows Jesus with genuine enthusiasm is not sinlessness. That is a lie, a pernicious one. Rather, the mark of a person who follows Jesus with genuine enthusiasm is a growing awareness of sinfulness. Look at what another apostle said. If we claim to be without sin, we're lying to ourselves, and the truth isn't in us. In other words, guys, could we all just get over ourselves, please? Can we all just perhaps talk about the big elephant in the Christian room? We are people who are right with God. And yet we also do wrong things. So what shall we do then? Look at how he goes on. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just and will forgive us and purify us from unrighteousness. Martin Luther, the great thinker of the Reformation, said that the Christian life is a continuous act of contrition and repentance. The Christian life is a cycle almost of sensing our fallenness and our damage and of trying to do something about it and moving on from it. When Jesus talks about the they who mourn and the they who are comforted, he uses the word they in an exclusive sense. God's comfort is reserved exclusively for those who mourn because of what's wrong in their life. And they and only they will have their tears wiped away from God's hands. And when he says they shall be comforted, the phrase comforted is used in an exclusive sense. Jesus is saying that as we mourn over our sin, we shall be and shall continually be comforted. It is on God's heart to comfort you in your hurt. And yet there are things that stop us receiving this comfort. The most obvious, of course, is a lack of honesty. I think it makes sense to say that the sooner you stop running from yourself, the sooner you can face up to yourself. God doesn't need you to be perfect. God is under no illusions about what you and I are like. But he does, it seems, need us to admit that we're not perfect. That not everything in life is as it should be. And in that admittance, do something about it. Move on, get better. We would also say, soberly, that this comfort is reserved for us when we genuinely feel bad about sin. The Bible would not expect us as Christians to be indifferent to the things that are wrong in our lives. I know the tendency in our generation is to say, we're all human, and that's right, we are all human, and we all make mistakes, and that's right, we do all make mistakes. But feeling okay about that and indifferent towards it is a telltale sign of a lack of Christianity. The Bible expects that we respond to what's wrong in our lives with genuine disappointment and remorse and genuinely endeavour to fix it and get it right. And most severely of all, I think, something above all else that stops us receiving comfort from God is our own inner lack of hope. One of the saddest things I see is that when a person believes that the way they are today is the way they will always be, where they convince themselves that they'll never get better, that they'll never change, that they'll never move on from what was wrong, that they'll never fix what's broken. And they get so depressed about their habits and their addictions and their immoralities that they say to themselves, well, what's the use? And in their despair, they choose to put themselves outside of the room where God is able to help them. And although they don't mean to, of course, they excuse the way they are by believing that they don't have a choice. And this is silly. Mourning over sin is not the same as being engulfed in despair. We are Christians. We are not aspiring to be Christians. We are Christians. And we believe that God makes us right with himself, not by making us holy, but by declaring that we are holy, even though we'll never live up to that declaration this side of heaven. So we would say of ourselves and to ourselves in comfort, have you failed? Have you been immoral? Are you frustrated at your lack of progress? Is there a side to your life that grieves over what's wrong? Then come, then come, then come. Confess your sin. Receive forgiveness. Allow God to comfort you in your failure and stand tall again, because God is exclusively for people just like you in your imperfections. Let me leave you with this. May the God of all hope fill you with joy and peace as you trust him, so that you may overflow with hope and with power in the Holy Spirit. God bless you. See you next Sunday.